for whatever reason, I get more excited about just making an impact in our employees and giving them an opportunity to grow and develop and enjoy what they do and who they do it with. And so for me, I think that unleashing leaders piece, that to me is just so important. I think I get the most joy out of it than anything else I do.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities. Welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Today, we are joined by Kevin Gearheart. He is the president of Rehab Medical based in Indianapolis. Their success story of the last years has been amazing, with a sustained year-over-year growth rate of 28%, and having received multiple accolades, including recently the Better Business Bureau's award for a culture built on trust. Today, we're going to be hearing from Kevin how they worked to be able to move the company to where it is today, and then diving into some tips on how does a group of leaders put together an intentional, purposeful plan for growth, given dynamic markets, constantly changing conditions, but how do you plan for it and how do you be purposeful about that? Kevin, this is a great time to have you on the show. I know a lot of people are asking this very question right now.
Lee, appreciate you having me on.
Wonderful. So Kevin, tell us first a little bit about who is Rehab Medical, who do you serve? What do you guys do? Give us some context about the industry you're currently in, so our stories will make a little bit more sense to our listeners.
Yeah, we are a very niche business. We're a mobility equipment provider, and we focus mainly on complex rehab technology. And so if you think about it, a patient that has ALS, MS, spinal cord injury, that's the majority of the patients that we provide equipment for. And really what we do is we don't manufacture anything, but really we're kind of the quarterback that really helps them navigate this process, because you've got physicians, you've got, physical therapists, you have the manufacturer, you've got the insurance provider, the patient, the caregiver. And what we do is we really navigate this process. We understand the guidelines, and then we'll eventually get to where we can provide the equipment. We'll then deliver it, service it, take care of everything on the back end. But, we're really trying to make sure that patients can get equipment that they need to have some level of mobility in their home.
Yeah, and restoring that mobility when due to circumstances or ailments, right, that's been deteriorated, that just, you literally are extending the quality of their life in such a material way. So it's a very purpose-driven business for sure. And then Kevin, about how many employees and then how many geographical markets are you guys operating in right now?
So we're in 18 states right now, looking to constantly expand that year over year. And we have about 650 employees at the moment.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so pretty distributed team then, right? Across those 18 states.
That's correct.
Excellent. But headquartered in Indianapolis, a hometown for my dad and a lot of my family. So that's great to be chatting with you here. So tell us a little bit about Kevin then. So, what was your origin story? What kind of memes and themes did you pick up that got you to the point where you might be interested in being part of this rehab story?
Yeah, it's interesting because, like a lot of us, we end up in a career and we're like, I don't know how I got here. This was not planned. I was a psychology major in undergrad, ended up moving out to Denver, and I worked in telecom and technology for a number of years. Really enjoyed that niche business, and then eventually wanted to go back and get my MBA. And so I went back, got my MBA from Indiana University, and getting out of school at that time, I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to do? Telecom tech was an option, and I came upon basically an opportunity to work for a retail optical chain. So, think Lens Crafters, but only in Indiana, and they had 20 locations. And so I went there after business school, worked there for about 5 years, really enjoyed it. I think that's really where I kind of got a lot more understanding of just how to run a business. And ultimately at that point, I knew I'd always kind of wanted to be a part of ownership of a business. My mindset has been entrepreneurial from the very beginning. When I was in college, I had my own painting business. I started buying, single family rentals. And so I've been in real estate, as much as I can, just grinding, right? That's kind of my nature. So I'm just a grinder.
And Indy is a good town for real estate as well, by the way. So yeah, I don't know if you did that.
It really is. And so it's been good. And I just, I've always kind of wanted that ownership, component in my primary job. And so I was at the optical chain, really wanted to have some ownership stake, tried to work that out. And unfortunately, it just didn't work. It was a second generation family business. I think he wanted to pass it on to his kids at some point. I got that. No harm, no foul. But for me, I was just looking for the right opportunity. And so as I was in that opportunity, one of the directors that used to work for me said, "Hey, there's a wheelchair company, and they're looking for, at the time, chief operating officer, and they're looking to expand and grow, and it's got a good, young owner, and he's got an aggressive mindset, and so you got to reach out to him." And so I started talking to him a little bit, and as it turned out, after we started talking, and this is probably a year-long conversation, the approach changed to where he came back and said, "Hey, I'd love to have you come join me. Definitely want you to come on, have an opportunity for ownership, but we're going to split this business in two. We're going to basically buy half the business, and we're going to kind of start over with some sales in place." And so, we had about 8 sales markets at the time. Now, to comparison, we're in over 30 markets, but 8 markets at the time. And we have some sales, but we don't have any back end, right? No back end office infrastructure. So we got to kind of start over. And I kind of likened it to building the plane while it's in the air. And for me, it was very challenging. And he was very upfront, like, "Hey, this is not going to be easy. I can't guarantee this is going to work." But for me, it was an opportunity. I bet on myself, and I'm happy doing that. And, as long as we can have the same approach and same mindset. And so I took the risk, and that was a little over 12 years ago, about 12 and a half years ago. And so I took the risk. And, at the time, I remember telling my wife, she said, "Hey, are you going to take that job? Or are you going to stay where you're at?" And I said, she thought for sure I was going to stay where I'm at. I said, "No, I'm taking it." She's like, are you sure? Like, that's a big risk. Like, you got to really.
I think what she was saying was, "I'm not sure you
Yeah.
want to do
Yeah.
that." Like,
Yeah, so we joke about it now. She's like, "That was a great decision." I'm like, "Well, thank you. Pretty happy with the way it turned out." But it wasn't just the decision, right? And as you know, Lee, it's not just the decision, it's the execution, which is really it's taken a long time to get here. But looking back, it's a great decision.
well, it created the possibility, right? There was no guarantee at all, but it created the possibility for you to do that. But that's great. I mean, and you see this. I'm beginning to see the red thread. Like you said, it wasn't planned, and yet the pieces were like looking back, it looks like it was planned, right? But going forward, you had no idea. But you're picking up this telecom, fast paced, the operation side, your B school, the psychology of the human spirit. And then a little bit of durable medical goods with the optometry piece. So, the puzzle pieces are starting to get placed on the board, but you can't tell what picture it is just yet, right? And then you see this moment and you're like, okay, it's an equity play. I've got some momentum, right? Which is kind of nice, right? You're rebuilding the plane while it's in the air, right? But not going to be easy, no guarantee, almost trying to convince you not to do it, right? Like to me, that's a great way to test a leader candidate. If you're telling like this is going to be brutal, this is going to be difficult, success is not guaranteed, I'm not even sure you should do this. And if they're still like, "I'm in," that is a tell right there, right? Versus like, "I just want the guaranteed easy thing." That's like, well, then you're a follower, not a leader. So was there another partner, or was it just the two of you?
So no, at the time, and the way it was structured, I think he understood. Our CEO is great. He understood that really it's about how do you bring on more people to be a part of this plan. And so over the years, we've added a number of different partners. There's a couple other people that have been here long term that came on in an equity position the same time I did. And then over time, we've added a handful of other partners that have been with the company long term, same mindset, same approach, same core values that really has allowed us to help grow this business.
We hear the amazing statistics like I opened with, right? Almost 30% year over year growth sustained over 8 years. That's through multiple remarkably different market conditions, right? Coming on the heels of the Great Depression, the boom cycles, the pandemic, right now the craziness that we've had the last 2 years, but being able to continue to grow. And everybody's like, "Wow, I'd love to work for a company like that." Well, you didn't go to work for a company like that. You helped to build a company like that. So tell us a little bit about those first dark days, the first 3 years where success was not guaranteed. What were some of the challenges that you faced, and how did you prioritize what pieces to build first?
Yeah, I can tell you the first couple of years were really tough, and it was hard for the obvious reasons of, hey, we're starting over, right? We have no corporate office, we got to build infrastructure, we got to have a back end office, IT, accounting, HR, like we needed that. And so that was challenging enough the way it was. But then on top of that, we decided that we were going to change our product mix and our focus, and part of that was because the key product that was being offered was getting hit with a lot of price compression. There was a thing called competitive bidding in our industry that came and really just slashed prices everywhere. And so we really had to shift from standard wheelchairs to the complex rehab technology chairs that we're in now today. And pretty strong sales organization. And so we thought, well, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and choose a new product and it'll be fine, right? We'll sell our way out of it. That was not easy. And so I think that was a challenge that took us several years to figure out our model.
I
And
wanted to, I think you said it was about 5 when we talked earlier, right?
yeah. I mean, so it was, from 2011 to 2014 is kind of the range of like, man, just banging our heads, trying to figure it out. What does it look like? Changing structure. I mean, we had to change our sales compensation model as well. And quite honestly, when we did that, I think that was like the first year or two in the business, we lost half our sales reps, but it was something we had to do because it's like, we can't sustain this business if we don't. And so one thing we've been really good about is just understanding what decisions we have to make. And no matter how hard they are, the company comes first. And we're going to make those decisions and we're going to implement them and we're going to execute like mad to make sure that we can fight through them. But sometimes those decisions are really hard, but you got to make them.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes the most strategic decision is to say no to something, right? And like you said, like here we are, we're in these formative rebuilding years, and you had to lose half your sales force. You had to, give up on an existing product line that had been, your lifeline just because it wasn't viable anymore. I think that shouldn't be seen as a setback. I think those should be seen as the transition moments that are the setups for the next breakthrough that you're about to have, right? Well, and you mentioned like you're doing things like back office and commission structures and product mix, and for a CEO or a president, that doesn't always sound sexy, right? It's like, hey, we just want to grow, we want to go, let's, but doing the internal work to say, hey, we gotta have a period of incubation to get this mix right, and then we can hit the throttle to grow, baby, grow. That takes some discipline to kind of be mature about that. Were you and your CEO always aligned on that, or did you guys have some like, no, let's go now, and you're like, hey, we gotta, if we don't have the internal systems, we're not gonna be able to support that growth, right? Like, how did that conversation or those conversations unfold?
Yeah, I think the one thing we have is we have a really good team, first and foremost, and so there's a group of us that really work well together. And I think with us we have a structured communication pattern in terms of when we get together and when we talk about changing plans. And so the one thing we've really won on is figuring out what that structure and that cadence is. And so when we get into a room, and now we do it about every 6 months. We don't really try and change too many things that frequently. It used to be quarterly. We get in a room and we hash it out, and everyone's got a voice and everyone's got a vote, and we're gonna choose the best decision. And we all know that no matter what decision we make, when we walk out of that room, we all are aligned. Like that's the decision, and now it's about execution. And I'm a firm believer that strategy and ideas, you can have a lot of ideas and a lot of strategies. I believe that's really important, but man, execution is just massively critical for you to be successful. And you got to have the right people that are bought in, that are just driving and driving and driving and just trying to do everything they can to hit the mark.
Well, you mentioned having this disciplined approach to having robust dialogue, all the debates, all the ideas, right? Everybody gets a voice, but then converging on, hey, this is what we're going to do. And then being in full alignment, whether you disagreed, whether you dissented, doesn't matter anymore, right? Like you said, the company comes first. But it sounds like you had an evolution in that process. So let's go into this here because I think this is the juicy practical stuff our listeners are going to love. So tell us a little bit about maybe the early version of what was that cadence of conversation to say, hey, where do we want to go? How do we want to grow? Who's going to get us there? What did that look like? And maybe how has that evolved and what does it look like today? Because there's not a one size fits all,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
not at
so tell
all.
us what about that evolution?
I don't think it's one size fits all. And I think even for us, I mean, we're a great example of, what we used to do 8 years ago, 9 years ago, even 4 years ago has changed dramatically, right? As we get bigger and we evolve, we just make changes and tweaks and we figure out what works for us now. Back in the early days, there was four of us that would get into a room. So our VP of Ops, VP of Sales, myself, and our CEO, and we get in the room and we'd meet every quarter. And our CFO would be in some of those meetings, but a lot of it was just operational planning of, hey, what are we doing? Where are we going? And every quarter we try and hold changes to those times because when you're growing rapidly, or even when you're just fighting through challenges, it's really simple to say, oh, let's tweak this, let's change this. And so we figured out minor changes you can make day to day, month to month. Larger changes, we held ourselves accountable to say, hey, we're going to bring that to the next strategy meeting. And I think that's worked well for us. So we're not making knee-jerk decisions and reacting to things too wildly. And then every quarter we would sit down and we would go through and say, okay, these quarterly strategy meetings or working meetings, what we got to was, it's not an update meeting. right? It's not, hey, let me tell you how great I am. We don't care, right? You're great. Let's what we need to do is, hey, what things do we need
That's
to
why I
work on?
choose, that's why I choose to be in business with you, right? So yeah.
Yeah. So what things do we need to work on? And we come through and it's, everybody's got topics and it's like, hey, we want to discuss this. We're going to break it down. We're going to argue about it. We're going to discuss it. And then we come up with a plan. And then we have a very, detailed kind of to-do list and follow-up so we can hold ourselves accountable. And so really every quarter that was the approach. And I think as we were making changes and we were building things out, that worked really well.
So pause there for a second, Kev, before we go to the evolution. So just a little practical there. How long was that meeting? Was it an hour? Was it 2 hours? Was it 2 days?
It used to be a full day. And then, we'd have some where it's like, hey, it's 2 days offsite. And we always do it offsite, never in the building. So there's no distractions. It's truly get away and you're not doing anything but this because it's that important.
So you've got focus. You bring, and about how many topics in a typical full day quarterly conversation? How many topics would you guys cover?
Yeah. I mean, there's probably 4 or 5 key topics per major department. Okay, what's going on in this department? What are we doing here? What challenges do we need? Who do we need to hire? What structural changes are we making? Those are the types of discussions that we're having.
All right, gotcha. And then, but the idea being, we're going to decide on a few macro changes for the next quarter, lock that in, and we're like, hey, we want to do this one, but we need to marinate on that a little bit, or now's not the right time to execute, or it's just too much to try to bite off in one, and then that would seed the agenda for the next quarter, right? So okay, so that's a good cadence and cycle. And that got you in the early years when you were kind of still trying to get your ground. And then, yeah, what does it look like today? How has that changed?
Yeah. So the next iteration was really we kind of started shifting. We shifted to where we still had 4 meetings a year, but then it became, hey, let's have one really long planning session for the next year. And so that would be November, December, and that was an offsite 2-day session. What are we doing for the next year? And so we're trying to make fewer or less frequent decisions and make them bigger and then map them out. And so it's, big decision meetings in the end of the year. And then quarterly is more of a, hey, did you get your to-do list done? Right. All the things we said we were going to do. Are we on track? Are we off track? Are there any minor tweaks? And this is like 1 or 2 topics now we're talking about in that quarterly session follow-up. And then mid-year is a full day, bigger meeting. And then again, quarterly kind of touch base. Are we on track? Major changes, minor tweaks, whatever. And that's kind of been the cadence we ran with for a number of years. And we figured out that year-end planning session was really good. And then we would start to where it's like, okay, great. We make these decisions for the next year. Now the 4 of us would go out and we would start to disseminate that plan, right? Hey, here's what we're doing. Here's what you're doing. Here's what you're doing. And so that worked for a number of years really well. And then about 2-3 years ago, we realized that we're getting too big and we finally now have like a lot of other really good leaders in these departments. How do we get them involved and to help execute, but also just let's speed this process up. But also, man, we have so much going on. 3 or 4 people can't be making all these decisions and rolling everything out. Like that doesn't scale anymore.
Now, what you can do when you're a 50 to 100 employee organization is not the same thing you can do when you're a 600 employee organization.
No doubt. And I would say with that, that's one of the reasons, we recognize like, hey, we also need clarity of message because, I can't be in every meeting anymore. The couple other people can't be in all these meetings. So how do we make sure that we're all aligned in terms of how we're approaching these things? So that was a big focus. And now what we've done is we now have a process where, we still have our strategy meeting and we map out kind of what's going on in the following year. And that actually starts quite honestly around June or July. Our VP of sales kind of goes through a very detailed process where he sits down and his first, question he's asking himself, okay, what locations and really who do we have and who's ready? We do a lot where we're bringing people off the bench and we're setting them into a position to take on some more responsibility. And so he's starting to break down who do we have, who's ready, what can they take on? Do they have enough support if we put them in that position? I mean, we're focusing heavily on people and structure. And so he'll spend probably 3-4 months working on some stuff, coming back to myself and our CEO, VP of Ops, go back and forth, keep fine tuning. And then finally we'll come up with a growth strategy for the following year. And so we've had that plan in place for a number of years, but now it's like we started sooner. It's much more detailed and we're mapping everything out to we're launching this location. This person's going to move here. This is when we're going to backfill them. Just a lot of timing nuance. and mapping out exactly what that growth plan is for the following year. And that's clearly why we've been able to consistently grow each year at a percentage that we're intentionally trying to hit, not overgrowing, not growing ourselves out of business. So we mapped that out. And then now what we've done the last couple of years, which is quite honestly, I think it saved us last year because we had so much going on. Then we have a full 2-day offsite meeting where we sit down, bring all the key department leaders in and say, okay, guys and gals, here's our growth plan. Here's our strategy. Here's where we're going, right? We're going in these markets. Here's the timing of it. Here's the impact from a volume standpoint. Here's what's going to happen. Here's who's moving, right? And so we spend a lot of time really just detailing all of that out. And then we break off, and then they come back and say, okay, think through this. What problems will this now cause, right? Do you understand what problems this might cause? Do you understand the plan?
Wow, that's an important step that you just mentioned there, Kevin. I think a lot of leaders like, yes, I've said, here are the tablets, now hear this, go forth and execute. But you stopped and said, okay, now tell me how this is going to break. And a lot of leaders do not have the stomach to hear that kind of criticism.
Yeah.
Right. They want people to be like, oh, this is a brilliant plan, oh wise one, right? But you guys are like, okay, here's our thoughts. Now, where are the gaps? That's fantastic. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I didn't want that to slip by, because that's genius.
Yeah, and it's a really important part. I mean, we're, one, it's like, hey, do you understand the plan? Yes, I understand it. Okay, now break down your department. Do you, let's think about timing. And so I walk them through a process where it's like, okay, assess where you're at right now. What's working, what's not working. Okay, I talk about the terrain, right? You understand the terrain, understand the map. You're here. You're gonna end up here. Okay, what gaps are in the way now, right? And then, oh, by the way, what gaps are going to get created over the next year when we grow another 20%? Because you're like, man, I'm in great shape now. Well, okay, when you add 20%, when does it break? Well, it breaks about July of next year. Okay, so what's our plan? How do we back into that? I mean, there's so much planning of that I think, we brought people in, and truly, I mean, we went through every single department. And then we're spending a whole, day off site working with them, going, okay, here's what I'm, I mean, back and forth. They're talking to every different leader, getting a lot of collaboration. They come back in the next morning, they present, hey, here's where I'm at. Here's where I need to be. Here's where I got problems now. Here's where I'm going to have problems when we grow. Here's my plan to address that. And then we use the rest of December, because we have these meetings at the very beginning of December. And then we use the rest of the month to really just a lot of back and forth where I'm meeting with them, our CEO's meeting with them. And it's like, okay, let's finalize that.
Those are individual conversations there, right?
Yep. Yeah. Let's finalize the plan. Let's stamp it. And that way, beginning of the year, that's when we roll it out. And that way, everyone's aligned. Everyone knows what the plan is. We're rolling it out to sales, field ops, HR, compliance, internal operations. I mean, every department is rolling out their plan, and it's all in lockstep with a clear understanding of what we're doing and when we're doing it, and how we're going to work together to do it.
You talked about how in the early days, yeah, you guys got, had a solid, 1 or 2 day offsite with the 4 of you, came up with a plan, and then you just, updated it quarterly. You mentioned having, I think it was your VP of sales. You said starting even in June and July, and the question you mentioned there was, it's not just where do we want to grow, but who's ready, right? And who's ready to be tapped, and who's going to be there, because growth depends on leadership, right? If you're going to open a new market, in a new geographical area, that progenital seed is that leader. So could you give us a little insight on when you're either you or the VP of sales is doing that, what are the types of indicators that you're looking for in that person to say, yeah, they're ready, or not yet, they need to incubate a little longer? And then maybe a bit about how do you communicate that to that person, because maybe they don't believe it, or maybe they think they are and they're not, right? Like, so there's the identification of it, and then there's the communication of it. Would you be willing to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, and again, this is another thing that's changed over the years. It used to be just like, hey, we want to open this market, and we just go reach out to somebody and be like, hey, we think you're ready. Do you want the job? Right.
Yeah. And by market, just to clarify for our listeners, we're talking about like you're opening a city, right?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
particular
Correct.
geographical, municipality.
Yeah. So like this past year, we opened in Cleveland, Baton Rouge, Augusta. Like those are the Miami, Charlotte. So those are 5 markets we opened last year.
Got it. Yep. All right. So that was the old way, was just when you said, hey, you want it? We think it'd be good. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now it's really, it also starts with, okay, what VP of that region has capacity, right? So we also want, the top end, leaders of those areas, do they have capacity to add another market? If they've got a heavy lift and they've got challenges right now and they can't take on another market, then it doesn't work. And that's kind of where we start is
So
does
you have
somebody have.
regional VPs who are over larger combinations of
Yep.
markets as well. So, okay.
Yeah, and they have to have capacity to take on a lift because the new market's going to be a lift. And so that's where it starts in
Okay.
terms of assignment and
So the
breakdown.
existing leader, the regional VP, do they have capacity?
Yep.
And then let's say, okay, I'm like, yeah, Kevin, I could take on Augusta, right? And you're like, but who's that going to be? Because it can't be me.
Yeah, yeah. So with that, we then and what we've developed is we created kind of an organic growth application model. And what we did was we basically said, hey, here's however many markets in the United States that we would go into based on size and kind of where the geography makes sense for us. And then we just rolled it out and said, hey, if you have been, with the organization for X amount of time, you're at this amount of, percent to quota, and, you have this, ATP designation qualification, apply for these jobs. And so we've basically created an internal job board, if you will, of people that are qualified. And they say, hey, because literally, like me going out and saying, I really want to move to, Boston. I had a conversation the other day. Hey, we should open a market in Boston. Okay, who's gonna be the sales leader there? Well, I don't know. Well, I can't go to Boston without a sales leader. For us, that's a bottleneck. And so what we do, rather than us picking markets, we said, hey, here's a whole list. You tell us which one you want to move to, right? We had someone go, hey, I would love to move to Dallas. And so we're opening a market in Dallas this year. So he had to apply, he had to go through a process, he had to interview. We make it a very clear, long, drawn out process to make sure that we have the right person, that they're ready, that we have capacity at the leadership level. And then from there, everything else we can kind of fill in behind. And so we figured out that, in our industry, there's an ATP, which is a professional that has to do all the custom fitting of the wheelchairs. And a lot of people think that's
What is ATP? What's that acronym
stands
stand
for
for?
assistive technology professional.
Okay,
And
got
so a
it.
lot of people would think, well, that's your bottleneck because you can't do business without it. No, what we figured out is our bottleneck is sales leadership. I need a sales leader who understands our model, understands our approach, can drive things the right way. And then obviously I've got to have an ATP, but this is where if I,
Now, it's not
you
that
know,
you can, it's not an all or nothing, right? Like as soon as you open up that sales leader, then the next one you got to do is the ATP, but it's just order of operations.
yeah, that's exactly right. You're exactly right. It's not a bottleneck, it's the bottleneck. And so that's what we figured out as well. And so, with that, again, we just, as we've opened up markets, we figured out what works, what doesn't work, some trial, some error. But now it's a process. And again,
So really you're taking the markets and you're treating them like candidates. Then you're taking your sales leaders and you're treating those like candidates and you're saying, okay, where is there already an affinity or a match? And then based on that, you're saying, okay, well, while yes, Boston's on radar, Dallas is the one where we've got a willing and viable candidate. So we're going to prioritize the one that has a natural mass versus trying to artificially force this one that I want, but now I have to use effort and leverage to do it. That's not working smart. And that would be exhausting, right? Like you could not sustain doing that model over and over again. You can sustain people saying, hey, I want to go to Baton Rouge. And you're like, right on. I think you're ready.
Yeah, it's and again, it used to be where it was kind of, our model was almost like a next market over, right? We're in Louisville. We got a couple of really good reps. We're going to Lexington because it's close enough. I can branch out. And so early days, that was how we grew, is we just kind of, spread out a little bit. And I think as we realized, it was nice because we realized what it took to open a market and what worked with those markets and what didn't. We had a little more, of a backstop, if you will, because we're right next door. Now we figured out what works and what we need, and that's where we're able to kind of launch into a new state or a new market, truly organically, and without fail.
So you talked about they're willing, it's a desirable market, and you go through an application process. Is there like one attribute, not necessarily the biggest and the most important, but one attribute in that sales leader candidate that you're looking for to say, okay, that tells me they're ready?
I think for me, and I think this is kind of our culture in general, but I think it's a really good indication of who's ready to be a sales leader. Is, obviously you have to have the core, components of sales and understanding it. But for me, it's truly, I'm looking for somebody who's humble, hungry, and smart. And when I see that in a candidate and they come in and they say, man, one, I don't have an ego. I really just want to come in company first, as we mentioned earlier. That's really important for our culture. But they come in and they're like, man, I'm humble, I'm hungry, man. I want to, we go through these interviews and I see the look behind some of these guys' eyes. I call them kids because they're some of these guys are young. Yeah, but these guys, I mean, you can just tell they're so hungry to get out and make a difference. And I think that's probably what I see more than anything. It's not hungry for personal, gain. Honestly, it's like I see these people and they want to, yeah, hungry for impact. They want to come out, they want to improve someone's lives, they want to build a team, and then obviously smart. I mean, I just, and that's what I look for. When I see those three attributes in these sales candidates, and I know they've got the sales acumen behind it and the process that we're going to be able to provide support for, I'm very confident when I see those things that, you know what, we're going to be really fine in that market.
So now let's jump forward again. You talked about you created a plan for the year in advance, and but then you would break it down so you could see, by what, by when. Tell us a little bit about your forecasting progression in terms of how you guys are actually putting numbers and dollars behind those goals, because that's a step that, when you're a 10 employee company, that's not typically a maturity step, but when you're 100 plus, like, you absolutely need to be thinking in these terms.
Exactly. I think we used to probably just do it, right? Just grow and kind of see. Now we basically kind of start with the process of say, okay, our target is 20% growth, right? And so that's until we change it. Hey, it's 20% our target. So we start with that. And then from there, we start looking at existing markets. Where are we at, right? Like what can they grow with the existing model? We've got some that are mature markets. They might grow 1 to 2%, and that's all we're expecting out of them. We have some that are emerging markets where they might have been either started a handful of years ago, or we're really starting to see some gain and traction, and so we expect them to grow. Or hey, guess what? We're going to carve out a new territory, and we're going to take this from a 5 sales rep territory to 6. And so we just start kind of what I
So
call,
there's different
yeah,
profiles, right?
yeah,
There's based on the life cycle of a market, right? You have different profiles, and this might be 1%, but that one might be 100%
that's right.
growth.
Yeah, exactly. And so we put them into exactly what you're calling profiles, right? So you have your new, like last year we opened 5 new markets. Okay, what do we expect them to do this year versus last year? So that's one bucket. Then we've got kind of the ones that were started 3 years ago, right? We expect them to grow. Then we've got some where we're going to add, sales reps to those markets. Then we have mature markets, and what changes are we going to make? And so we look at all these different offices and we put them in those buckets. And then we like to call what I just, we start stacking growth on top, right? So hey, this market's going to grow X%, X amount of revenue. This market. And so we just keep stacking and say, okay, we now have X amount for this category. We have X amount for this category. We get X amount for this category. Where are we at? And really it's, and where are we at with some plans that we have to put in place? And then, oh, by the way, we're now adding a new market in Dallas, a new market in Houston later in the year, a new market here, right? And so we just keep stacking, and then we get to a point where we go, is this what we want? Yep. Did we hit the 20%? Yes. Okay. Do we have any acquisitions in the pipeline? Yes or no. See if we want to build those in. And then from there, we not only kind of take it in terms of great, I can get to 20% growth, but now I'm going, okay, what does that look like month by month? Right. And so now I'm going sideways, because, and this is the part that's really important for supporting that growth, because, hey, it's one thing if I'm going to grow 20%, but when is it going to hit and where is it going to hit? And that's why when we sit down with our department leaders, it's like, hey, guess what? We're growing 20%. Oh my God, that's so much. I can't, but good news, you're actually not going to see any of it until mid next year. So now you have time to plan for that. And so we really kind of look at it a bunch of different ways and make sure that, is it feasible? Is it reasonable? Is it aggressive enough, but it's not too aggressive? And so we're really breaking this thing apart in a lot of different ways, which is why we start so early.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's a discipline, and it's continuous, right? It has a cycles to it, an annual cycle, a quarterly cycle, then a monthly cycle. But each cycle has its own purpose and fit. I think some companies are before that level of maturity, and so this gives them something to look ahead to. Other companies, maybe they're 1,000 employees now, right? They're like, "What are you talking about? Like, that was so 80s." But so many of these mid-sized organizations, this is the sweet spot. Let's talk about then what's the ongoing measurement of that. So you have the goals, you have the plans, you have the breakdowns, you've got the connected. Very thoughtful. Tell us a little bit about the metrics that you guys are looking at. How do you balance the leading and lagging?
Yeah, we are a very metric driven organization, and my background, again, a little bit of finance, a little bit of operations, MBA, and so I really focus heavily on numbers. And so across the board, we have pretty much a number and a metric for every single department, and we focus on them. And a lot of it is a couple of things. One is we're monitoring them so we can quickly understand where are we about to break, right? What's happening and we're about to break. And then also, like, as we're growing, it also tells us, hey, when do I need to hire again? And that way we get away from like, hey, I need more bodies. Well, okay, maybe you do, maybe you don't. No, here's the metric. Here's how many, I think about, like, give you a good example. We have an individual department that, they do insurance verification, right? So we get claims that come in and they're verifying the insurance, and we have an expectation that they can do at least 30 per day. So every individual has to be able to do 30 per day, right? That is their key task. And then from there, we're looking at, okay, well, how many bodies do we have? How many employees do we have? And then how many are coming in? Right. And at what point do I need to rehire? And it's a couple fold, right? Like, part of it's just, when do I hire again? But it's also used as a measure of how much support do my employees need? So if I've got somebody that can only do 20, well, where's the problem? I know there's a problem because they can't get to 30. So is it that they need more training? Is it that they need different tools? They need more support? Like, where's the problem? And then our managers can kind of dive into that. And so that's kind of, we use our metrics in a couple of different ways. One is to see where we have problems, where we have bottlenecks in the process. Another area is just truly like, when do we hire? And then who needs more support and more training, right? And those are a lot of the ways that we're looking at metrics.
Well, it's a way to identify, what are the impediments. It's not a blame shame game. It's like, hey, if somebody's only doing 20, we know we hired for a high caliber, high trust employee. So if they're not getting to 20, it's not because they're just sitting on their duff. There's something must be getting in the way, so that, how do we remove or clear that impediment? Now, if you've done that and then they're still not doing it, well, then that's a whole other conversation, right? But using metrics to identify where can we serve and where can we support, has a very different feel to it than the typical punitive, model that sometimes people associate.
Yeah, and I think the critical part there is understanding, do you have the right managers relaying that message correctly? Because if you don't, it can be very detrimental, right? I mean, you've got people that are like, oh, I gotta get to 30 and they're gonna micromanage me and I feel stressed. Like, hey, if that's the way your employees feel, we have a problem, right? But if they say, hey, I gotta get to 30 and I know that's my mark and I'm gonna hit it. And if I don't hit it, then I can raise my hand and say, hey, I need some help. Like, and so it's really important the way you message those expectations. I think that's just really critical and that's transferable to any organization, right? I mean, how do you message expectations and make sure that you're not relaying the wrong type of message?
It's about contribution, not, being criticized, right? It's like how can we contribute? How do we make this happen? That's my commitment. Okay, great. I'm running into a challenge. Well, then I need help. Well, you've managed to have this growth and out of those, formative dark years, and along the way also built an amazing culture. And I think a lot of folks think it's one or the other. Either we have a great culture or we have great growth, but you can't have both. I think actually growth fuels culture, and I think culture fuels growth. How have you guys been developing your trust culture intentionally in parallel with all of these growth activities?
Yeah, and I would tell you, it never stops, and I think it's really important to focus on it. And I think for us, what we realize is it really just started with messaging. Going back to that concept, is for us, it was making sure we had one clarity of message of, hey, what are we trying to do, right? Like, and I think that's really important, so people understand the organization they're joining. And so, I always say, frustration comes when there's a gap between expectation and reality. For us, our vision is we want to be the national leader, and I emphasize the word we want to be the national leader, and we got a long ways to go. And so people coming in, it's like, oh, that's a really aspirational, aggressive organization. Is that the type of organization I want to be in? I want to be very clear up front who we are and what we're trying to do. Second part is our mission, which for us, it's to improve lives. And again, it's like, hey, do I embody that? Is that something that's important to me? If it's not, you're not going to be a fit here. And we also talk about and really emphasize our core values. And our core values are important because, again, that's how we align with each other and understand who are we as an organization, right? We're energetic to achieve, hard work with balance, compassionate. And so for us, we constantly talk about those things. And it's really important because that's kind of what defines our culture. You always want to have a culture that it's so strong and it's so pervasive that it's truly toxic to anyone that doesn't feel the same way, right? If you don't align with me and compassion is not important to you, guess what? This culture is not going to be right, and that's okay. Let's get that out up front. Let's make sure we're all on the same page about this is who we are. We're growing fast. Here's why we're growing, because we want to take care of patients. We want to create opportunities for employees. And if we're hyper just clear about that, people are going to come in and they're either going to go, man, that's the right place for me. I really want to work there. I know it's going to be hard, but I also know it's going to be worth it, right? Those people help that culture stay really strong. And then you have some people that come in and they go, I didn't want to work that hard. Right? Guess what? This isn't for you. And that's okay too. And that's where I think, we're never shy away from that stuff. And we're really upfront about it. And that way everyone knows what they're getting with us. It's very open. We are who we are. And hopefully if that's exciting to someone, come join us. You will love it here. And that's kind of our approach. And it's worked, thankfully. It also helps that we've had a lot of people. We have a great team. I tell you, we have so many people that have been here for a long time. And I think that longevity of key people just helps that culture, because you see the same people and they're driving. We're all aligned. We're all on the same page. That helps with that culture, and it just helps with everything. It helps with trust. And I like to, I don't know where I heard this, but I heard it somewhere. It's like, trust equals speed. And I think that's important for us. Is I know that the people I work with, they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And so we're moving faster because I'm no longer worried about their job. I'm worried about my job. And now we're moving faster because everyone's just driving together.
All of that energy gets to be channeled into progression and growth and impact versus protection and cattiness in the organization. And you had another quote that you had shared with me in our preview that also ties into this notion of balancing the micro and the macro. So what was that quote again, Kevin?
Yeah, it was. It's the concept of micro speed, macro patience, and I think that's something that we talk about a lot because we drive so hard and we go go go, and I think for some people, it can be really frustrating if things don't move fast enough. And I can tell you, in our early years, that was really frustrating because we were moving fast, micro speed, everything on the daily basis was just go go go, and things weren't moving fast enough. And so we recognized that, you got to trust in the process. And if you move really fast on a daily basis, but you have a little more patience about where this ship is going over the long term, you're going to have just a much better approach and a much better outcome in life. So you don't, and for us, it's also why we have these quarterly meetings and now half year, because it keeps us from making too many changes when things aren't happening fast enough. So it's like, hey, trust the process, bust your butt, hard work, energetic to achieve, get it done. But you also got to know that if you do the right things long enough, consistently enough, the outcomes are going to be there. And so, and I think that's something that, I just think it's really important for, not just our company, but I think a lot of people miss that mark because they think everything should happen right away. And it's like, no, just trust the process and just consistency. Eventually the outcome will be there.
So if I was to summarize it then, and I kind of joked about this with your last name. Gearheart, right? It's like you're blinding, sustained success comes from the gear side of it, right? That purposeful, disciplined planning, execute, measure, right? And then the heart part, create an environment that attracts the right kind of people that align with your values, that creates that trust, that creates the speed, and then sustain and persist on that over multiple cycles. That's what produces amazing sustainable growth like you guys are seeing. And that is a recipe, to your point, across different industries. Maybe you're not in a durable medical, customized industry. But you know what? It's that same pattern that I think other business leaders can recognize and say, yeah, I can replicate that. And maybe I'm starting in year one, right? And know that you've got 3 or 4 or 5 years of cultivating that soil to get it ready, and then you'll start to see the rewards. So having that patience. So Kevin, you were named for this, you were branded for this, and it was a great story for you to share with us today.
Well, Lee, I clearly need you on our PR team because I think you hit it. So I appreciate that.
Kevin, thank you so much for taking time of your busy schedule at this time of year for your business. Thank you for what you do for your communities and your employees and their families. Really appreciate you sharing these nuggets on, how to really turn an organization around and how to blend the discipline of strategy with the heart of culture to make that happen. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.